All right, Bismillah. On here just a few minutes early to make sure that the stream is working okay, get everything settled, and take any questions that anyone has. I'll be hanging out until that time. Just drop your questions in the comments. All right. Bismillah. Can I get a check on the sound? Let me know if you guys can see me and hear me okay. All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. So, we're going to be continuing our discussion of the books in the Hanbali madhab. Again, this is an introduction to the madhab, and we are at lecture 4 now, going over key figures and books in the madhab. And today we're going to talk about the rise of the Maqadisa and Al-Taymiyyah. As we go on, we'll go a little bit more about some books, and as I said, I'll be adding a few other slides to this, or a few other sessions to this, to talk about how the madhab is learned, which books to kind of start with, and then some about the books of Usul al-Fiqh and the books of Qawaid, and then maybe even have a guest on. I don't know, but this is all to kick off the classes that we will be doing in Dalil al-Talib and Al-Adab al-Shar'iyyah. So essentially to kind of give you some background about this. So, okay. So, actually, I wasn't even showing you guys a screen. Horrible. Yeah, so here's what we will cover. So let me just answer this since it's here before we get too far. Who are some of your teachers in Hanbali fiqh? So one of my main teachers was Sheikh Ahmed Rashid al-Ruhaili. I also studied with Sheikh Muhammad Nasir al-Suhaybani, Sheikh Abdullah al-Zahim, Sheikh Abdul Salam al-Sahimi. I studied with Sheikh Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Mukhtar al-Shinqiti. I also studied with Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymin. I also studied with Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan. Those were during summers in Riyadh and Qasim. Also attended with Sheikh Abdullah al-Fawzan, Sheikh Abdullah bin Jibreen. Whom else? Sheikh Abdul Muhsin al-Manif in Medina. Sheikh Hamoud al-Wa'ili. And others probably that I'm just not recalling at the moment. But I hope that answers the question, inshallah ta'ala. Alaikum assalam wa salihat. So let's move forward. The first book that we're going to be taking today is the Muharrar of Majd al-Din ibn Taymiyyah. So Majd al-Din ibn Taymiyyah, Abu al-Barakat, Abd al-Salam ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Taymiyyah, was the grandfather of the more famous Taqi ad-Din ibn Taymiyyah. So when people usually say Ibn Taymiyyah, they're thinking about Shaykh al-Islam Ahmed ibn Abd al-Harim ibn Abd al-Salam, Taqi ad-Din ibn Taymiyyah, whereas this is his grandfather, Majd al-Din. He first learned from his uncle, Fakhr al-Din al-Khatib, and Jamal al-Din ibn Malik, yes, that Ibn Malik, said fiqh was made supple for Majd like iron was made supple for Dawood. So why is this book important? Al-Muharrar fi al-Fiqh ala madhhab al-Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal. Because the author essentially takes the knowledge of Baghdad and compresses it into this mukhtasar, presents it as the madhab. So this goes back to Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, through Al-Kalwadhani, Al-Daynawari, and Ibn al-Munni. Majd al-Din ibn Taymiyyah's opinion in this book is considered the official madhab when Ibn Qudama agrees with him, or when Ibn Qudama is silent. So if you have Majd al-Din ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qudama agreeing on something, then in that time, that was considered the official madhab opinion. Then, if you had Majd al-Din expressing something, and Ibn Qudama was, I may have mistakenly said Ibn al-Qayyim before, but that's wrong. It's Ibn Qudama. Ibn Qudama agrees. If Majd al-Din says something and Ibn Qudama is silent, then the madhab is whatever Majd al-Din said. Now, why is this copy important? This copy is important, bismillah, because it has النكت والفوائد السنية على مشكل المحرر. So Ibn Rajab, Zain al-Din ibn Rajab, or Shams al-Din ibn Muflih, afwan, and the Hashia, right? So this is the Hashia of Shams al-Din ibn Muflih, right? He mentions Ibn Rajab's opinions at times. This is a mistake here. Should say Ibn Muflih. But it's important because this marginalia, right? When Al-Muharrar is silent on something, or when something else has not been mentioned, it gives you insight into what the madhab was, right? So this is considered a very important book. Now, the next book is Umdah al-Fiqh by Ibn Qudama. Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi was born in 541 in Al-Jamma'il area of Jerusalem. He journeyed to Baghdad and he studied with numerous scholars, including Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and Ibn al-Manni. He passed away in 620. So Ibn Qudama, he essentially takes, and this is what I said, the rise of the Maqadisa, right? So you have Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, you have his cousin who wrote Umdat al-Ahkam, and you have a number of other Maqadisa who kind of give rise, and they kind of take the knowledge of al-Jilani and really present it to the people of Asham, and codify the madhab even more. So what is Umdat al-Fiqh? Now, what you see in front of you is actually, an explanation of Umdat al-Fiqh called Al-Uddah fi Sharh al-Umdah, and that's by Baha ad-Din Abdurrahman ibn Ibrahim al-Maqdisi. Okay. Now, why is it important? It's important because it's one of the earliest shuruh on the book, and it presents most of the adillah that are in there. Now, why is Umdat al-Fiqh important? Umdat al-Fiqh is important because, number one, the language that the author uses is easy to understand. Number two is that he generally will mention a hadith that is the main hadith of the chapter, and that most of the rulings can be derived from tabarrukan. So he mentions it for the barakah of mentioning the hadith, sending salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ, and then because that one hadith, either explicitly or implicitly, can be used to derive most of the rulings of the chapter. Okay. There's another famous explanation by Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and it was printed. Now, the copy that I have is piecemeal, and I believe he only got to al-Ibadat. So Kitab al-Hajj is one giant thick volume, right? So each Tahara, Salah, Zakah, Siyam, Hajj, they're all each one volume. I do not know if that book has been printed in its entirety, but it is very valuable. Another very good modern explanation is the explanation by Professor Abdurrahman ibn Jibreen, who is the nephew of Sheikh Abdullah, if I recall, rahmatullah alayh. And it is a very, very thorough and well-written sharh that references a lot of modern issues and how they tie back to the issues that are in Al-Umdah, as well as the fatawa of ulama on those issues. Okay. The next book in kind of the Ibn Qudama series of writing books is Al-Mughni. He wrote it so that it can be convincing, which is what it means. He does not mention the dalil, he does not mention the evidences, he does not mention the ta'lil, he does not mention the rationale. Instead, he simply mentions 2 riwayah. So Umdat al-Fiqh is written on 1 riwayah. Al-Muqni mentions 2. And it was the second in his series of books of tafaqquh, to basically kind of progress in the madhab. Now, I should say one thing about Umdat al-Fiqh. Our Shaykh Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Mukhtar al-Shinqiti, hafidhahullah, he used to say that من قرأ عمدة الفقه وفهمه ودرسه وعلم ما فيه بأدلته فيكاد أن لا يفوته أو he said يكاد أن يفتي. It's possible that he could give fatwa. Or قلما يقف على مسألة لا يستطيع أن يجيب عنه. It's infrequent that he would be presented with an issue that he would not be able to answer. I remember him saying that in class specifically. So Umdat al-Fiqh is a very good book, and it's a very blessed book as well. Right? Al-Muqni is the second in this level. It's a very dense book, and it takes a lot to read through. But again, it is written in an easy language, which is easy to understand, is not difficult. In fact, its most famous abridgment is Zad al-Mustaqni', which most people know. But the problem with Zad al-Mustaqni', okay, and we'll talk about Zad al-Mustaqni' later. Not everybody likes Zad al-Mustaqni'. One of my teachers used to kind of ridicule Zad al-Mustaqni', actually. He used to call it Zad al-Mustanqa'. Astaghfirullah. You say it jokingly, but he said that because people you go to actually Sheikh Umar Sulaiman al-Ashqar, he mentions this in his book Tarikh al-Tashri'. If anybody wants to kind of go and see, read a written reference on this. One of the problems with عادة الاختصار والإيجاز في كتب الفقه, the norm of summarization and conciseness in the books of fiqh, is that they lose the student in the ikhtisar. They lose the student in the summation or in the summary. So while you could have gone to Al-Muqni' and read the paragraph and understood it right away, you're with Zad al-Mustaqni' and you're reading, okay, he said kada kada kada, well, this is where the dhamir, this is where the pronoun, what does the pronoun go back to? Does it go back to this issue, or does it go back to that issue? What exactly did the author mean by that? You might be following up from an issue 2 lines down, and it's connected to the one in the beginning. And so there's a lot of mental energy that goes in to fiqh al-ibara, into tearing apart or picking apart the phrases, that if you just read the original, you wouldn't have that problem. So Al-Ashqar, he makes a very good point, and that is that sometimes in trying to always stick with summarized works and anvam, so there's a nadam, where they take a book and they put it into poetic form. I'm not a huge fan of that. I only think that there are a few that are mostly successful in presenting information cogently in nadam form, in poetic form. A lot of times there's a lot of takalluf in them. If you just went with the original work, you would have understood quicker and been able to progress quicker. So not everything that was written is always, the best thing out there. Okay, the next book is Al-Kafi by Ibn Qudama. And Al-Kafi is where Ibn Qudama wanted to present the Hanbali madhab along with the dalil and the ta'lil. So this is where the author is mentioning the dalil and the source for the masail of the madhab. Now, this book, Al-Dalil, not only is it a repository for the evidences of the madhab, but it has become kind of a mainstay for other books to draw from. For example, like Ibn Doyan's Manar al-Sabil draws heavily on Al-Kafi. And so most of the time Ibn Doyan, he'll mention like an athar or something like that, and you go back and you look the phrase that he used, it's the exact same one that Ibn Qudama used in Al-Kafi. So it is an immensely beneficial work, and because of the connection between Manar al-Sabil and Al-Kafi, some scholars used to teach Dalil al-Talib, right, and then jump from Dalil al-Talib to Al-Kafi. They would start with Manhaj al-Salikin, then Dalil al-Talib, then Al-Kafi, and then other books. Okay, the last book, and this is, I'm going to cover two of them here, and the cover here is for the second. Okay, Ibn Qudama, he wrote a third book called Al-Mughni, and this is kind of Ibn Qudama's magnum opus. It's the culmination of his years of travel, study, analysis, narration. It's not just one of the greatest books of the Hanbali madhab, but one of the greatest books of Islam altogether. In fact, there's about 5 books that are considered some of the greatest books of Islam ever. I think Al-Dhahabi mentions a number of them. The Mughni of Ibn Qudama, the Muhalla of Ibn Hazm, Fath al-Bari of Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar, Sunan al-Bayhaqi al-Kabir is another one. By the way, Al-Dhahabi has a tahdhib of that called Al-Muhadhab, which is extremely beneficial. And the 5th, I want to say Al-Awsat by Ibn al-Mundhir, but I may be mistaken. I personally would add to that as well a few other books that I think, like I'la as-Sunan, I think is an extremely impressive book. And there's a few others. But regardless, the Al-Mughni is a very dense book, several volumes. He took, for you recall the other day, we talked about Al-Khiraqi's Mukhtasar. So Ibn Qudama said, kind of like as a way of honoring that early metin, he uses Al-Khiraqi's Mukhtasar as the basis for his sharh. And then he explains it along with his evidences, the riwayat of the madhab, and the positions of other madhahib, as well as their evidences. Then he explains what's called al-khilaf al-adi, higher variance of opinion, where he goes beyond the 4 madhabs and he mentions the madhahib of the salaf and the tabi'een and the sahaba. So he did not limit himself to the Masa'il that Al-Khiraqi mentioned, but he also mentions others. Now, his nephew, Ibn Abi Umar, he took Al-Mughni, and he said, Al-Mughni is great, Al-Mughni is good. It's written on the Masa'il of Al-Khiraqi, but Al-Muqni is better written and is more methodical, and we want a book that kind of follows Umdah, Muqni, Kafi closely. So I'm going to take the contents of Al-Mughni and then apply it as a explanation to Al-Muqni. And this is where we get Al-Sharh al-Kabir. This is called Al-Sharh al-Kabir. Now, years ago, Al-Sharh al-Kabir was written with the Muqni as the text at the top, and then Al-Sharh al-Kabir, all right, or printed, I should say, and then Al-Insaf, which we will cover later. So Al-Insaf is fi ma'rifat al-tarjih min al-khilaf. Okay, so this is Al-Mardawi's book where he goes back and he tries to look at the different riwayat and balance and do tarjih of them. All right. Now, one of the great things about Al-Sharh al-Kabir is that although this was written by his uncle Ibn Qudama, he doesn't simply take Al-Mughni and just copy it verbatim. He adds to it issues and adilla at times and ta'lilat at times. that are beneficial. So Abu Salihat says, why was Al-Mughni so highly regarded and chosen to expand on above the rest of the books in his curriculum? I think it's because it is the more meticulously written in a very strict fiqhi sense. Umdat al-Fiqh has a very easy, kind of easy breezy ibara, easy breezy, not a tight exacting register in the way that it's written, where an Al-Kafi is also kind of open and easy. And I don't mean that in easy in a diminishing sense, but it doesn't have the meticulous exacting phrases that are typical of fiqh works. Al-Muqni does, and it has two riwayat. So generally, when the Hanabila have two riwayat, the other riwayah is going to be the riwayah of at least two or three of the other madhahib. So by knowing Al-Muqni, you can faithfully pretty much encompass your madhab and a perspective on most of the other madhahib. Okay. Next is Al-Insaf by Al-Mardawi, and that's the third book that's here. And this was written by Ala ad-Din ibn Sulaiman al-Sa'di al-Mardawi. He died in 885. He was born in the year 817 in the town of Marda, where he grew up. He memorized the Quran, studied fiqh under the town's jurist, Ahmed ibn Yusuf. Then he moved to Damascus. He settled in the Abu Umar school. He memorized Al-Fiqh ibn Malik and Al-Muqni'. And he studied various subjects with his teachers, including fiqh, usul al-fiqh, hadith, tafsir, nahu, sarf, and other language-related books, as well as fara'id, the inheritance laws, and mathematics. He read Al-Muqni' with Abu al-Faraj, Abdurrahman ibn Ibrahim al-Nabulsi, and he memorized it. He then studied with At-Taqi ibn Qundus, whom he closely followed and learned a lot from. And Ibn Qundus himself has a few books in fiqh that he has written. So what is the idea behind Al-Insaf? The idea behind Al-Insaf is that Ibn Qadi Ajloon had taken the minhaj of Al-Nawawi, and he wanted to say, okay, here's Al-Nawawi's minhaj, here's what he said was the madhab for the Shafi'iyya, and let's try and trace all of this back to a Shafi'i and see where it goes, and which one is actually the most predominant opinion and not. He said, I want to do the same thing for Ibn Qudama's Al-Muqni'. Okay. So in this book, he would not simply mention what is mansus from the Imam. As we said, mansus is those things that Ahmed specifically said. But he would also bring those things that are mafhum, those things that are understood of issues, and then also related issues and issues of khilaf. If Ibn Qudama left an issue open-ended, but it was conditionalized or restricted by a later scholar, then Al-Mardawi mentions that as well. So many of the dawabit, the kind of regulating rules of internal fiqh chapters, are mentioned in Al-Insaf, right? So a dawabit is different than a qaida. Qaida, you have qawaid kulliyah, qawaid kubra, and then qawaid far'iyah, and then you have dawabit. So you have kind of universal rules of fiqh. You have most predominant large rules of fiqh. You have subsidiary rules of fiqh that they'll go to most chapters, and then you have dawabit, and those are rules that are specific to chapters. Okay, so all of these like conditionalizations and restrictions and dawabit and things like that, quyud and all of that, they're mentioned by Al-Mardawi. Okay, if Ibn Qudama had mentioned like a general phrase, but a specific rule was intended, then Al-Mardawi clarifies that as well. And if there are turuq, meaning differing pathways of an issue back to the ashab, the companions of Imam Ahmed, he mentions those as well, right? So in short, much of the work that we mentioned earlier in, I think it was lecture 2 about reading Hanbali books, is done in this book. This book is the book that goes through that whole like rubric of Imam Ahmed is explicitly saying this, implicitly saying this, and his student said that. Where do we draw the line and we say this is what he officially held? Okay, next we have Al-Furu, and we have Tasheeh Al-Furu. So Shamsuddin Ibn Muflih al-Ramini al-Maqdisi, he was one of the most prominent students of Ibn Taymiyyah, al-Mizzi, and al-Dhahabi, and one of the leading Hanbali jurists. He was from the village of Ramin in the Tul Karam Governorate of Palestine. Harrarah Allah min Dhulm as-Sahayna. This book was universally praised by scholars in the author's lifetime. So Ibn Muflih, and quite frankly, Kitab al-Furu' is like one of my favorite books of fiqh, because it is very exacting, it is very precise, and it is coded with the madhab and other. He'll say, nassan anhu, the Imam says this is explicit from him, wifaqan li sheen wa mim, right? So this is in agreement with sheen and mim, in agreement with Shafi'i and Malik. So now we're in agreement with Noon, with Nu'man, Abu Hanifa. So Ayn, this is an issue of ijma'. So you have a shorthand in the book for knowing the other madhahib, as well as the mu'tamad of the madhab. And then Al-Mardawi as well, he wrote a tasheeh on it, just like he did with Al-Insaf. Okay, and I believe this is the last one that's in our repertoire here tonight, and this is Al-Wajiz by Al-Dujayli, and this is Fath al-Malik al-Aziz bi Sharh al-Wajiz by Ali ibn al-Baha al-Baghdadi. And this tahqiq, I think, is the only tahqiq of the book by Ibn Dahish, Abdul Malik ibn Dahish, rahmatullah alayhi. So Dujayli, Al-Husayn ibn Yusuf ibn Muhammad al-Baghdadi, Dujayl is a suburb of Baghdad, and it's the apparent birthplace of its author. He sought knowledge in Baghdad, then Damascus. He memorized Al-Muqni, al-Shatibiyya, Al-Fiyat ibn Malik, and the Al-Fiyat of Ibn Mu'ti, the Maqamat al-Hariri, and others. Notice how Ibn Malik is mentioned in this period. So yes, Ibn Malik al-Andalusi had moved to Syria, and he had written the Alfiya, and it became extremely popular and was studied in his lifetime. And before that, Ibn Mu'ti had written his Alfiya in Arabic, which is why Ibn Malik, he says in the beginning of the Alfiya, fa'iqatan Alfiyat Ibn Mu'ti. It was surpassing the Alfiya of Ibn Mu'ti. It's said as an anecdote that after he wrote that, he was unable to sleep for like 3 nights. And then he finally slept, and he saw Ibn Mu'ti in a dream. And Ibn Mu'ti said to him in a dream, Subhanallah, hayyun wahid yaghlibu alfa mayyit. Subhanallah, one living person can beat 1,000. And so he knew that he had to not just say that his Alfiya surpassed Ibn Mu'ti, but he needed to recognize Ibn Mu'ti's virtue. So he said, وَهُوَ بِسَبْقٍ حَائِزٌ تَفْضِيلًا مُسْتَوْجِبًا ثَنَائِيَ الْجَمِيلَ. And he is, because of his precedence, has secured his virtues, and it is obligatory for me to praise him in a good way. And after that, he was able to write the rest of the Alfiya. There's a couple of anecdotes that are around Alfiya ibn Malik like that. Like they say, like when he says, وَرَجُلٌ مِّنَ الْكِرَامِ عِنْدَنَا, and a man from the honored amongst us, that he was thinking of an example. He couldn't think of what that example would be until Imam an-Nawawi walked in on him, and then he said the example. Anyway, I'm going off track. So anyway, Al-Wajiz of Al-Dujayli. Al-Dujayli, he learned from Al-Zajjaj, Al-Bazzar, Al-Mizzi, Al-Ba'li, Ibn al-Dawalibi, and Taqiyuddin al-Zarirani, who has a very good book on Al-Furu. As for the Matan, then Al-Dujayli wrote his Al-Wajiz to be similar to Ibn Qudama in the Umdah, right? Not mentioning other than the Mu'tamid of the Madhab. And the book has been explained and annotated numerous times. Of this is the explanation of Ali bin Baha al-Baghdadi, who attempted to take the Mu'tamid of the Hanabila in his day, okay? The books that were Mu'tamid of the Hanabila in his day, and use it as an explanation for his Sharh. So if he takes from Al-Mughni, Sharh al-Kabir, Al-Furu, al-Insaf, and he explains Al-Wajiz through these books. And that's one of the benefits of it. So if you wanted like a shorthand for the 4 books that are mentioned up on here, then Fath al-Malik al-Aziz is a very good shorthand for that. So that's it for today. And inshallah ta'ala, we will continue tomorrow. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. I know that last week I said that today we would be starting with a dalil. However, I did not have time to edit some of the text that I wanted to present on the presentation before doing so. And so I have to do that before, inshallah ta'ala, before we go in and do that. So anyway, if anyone has any questions, I will be happy to take them. And let's do that. If anyone has any questions, let me go back here. Okay, let me see if there's any on Instagram. If some of you are saying, man, what is all this? I just want to learn Islam. This is Islam. This is one way that you are tuning into the scholarly tradition of Islam. And it is therefore very important to just raise the level, even if you're not studying this school, even if you're not even interested in the study of fiqh, then you need to raise the level of literacy. Like, look, just by going over, I think it was maybe 10 books today, we talked about maybe 20 different authors, 3 different times of period times, at least 4 different geographical locations. And by raising the level of literacy that you have in the history of books and people and their connection to your faith, then you gain a greater appreciation for scholarship in general, and for the scholarship of this in particular. I mentioned a special guest. Maybe, inshallah, I'll try. I will try to see if I can get some guests. Maybe if we do a discussion on books of usul, I'll bring somebody who can speak about usul. I think that would be a good idea. I have read that Sheikh al-Qaimi has said that the madhab has remained mostly the same throughout the 3 stages. How accurate is this? He would be more qualified to answer, but I think in general, that's true from what I can tell. And I think it's because the sheer breadth of opinion from Imam Ahmed has not necessitated lots of the turuq and awjuh that you would find in some of the other madhahib, because the Imam had already expressly had those opinions. Where can I study Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat in English? So I think you can look on Twitter. Sheikh Furhan al-Zubairi of Institute of Knowledge, my friend and dear scholar and brother, has a list of resources per madhab of classes that are out there that are well done, and he mentions in there some of them. So there's a translation of Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat by Sheikh Musa Ferber, which is excellently done. In fact, all of Sheikh Musa's books are very well done. And, I recommend those translations highly. And then as far as somebody who has probably recorded one, I want to say John Sterling or Starling. Sorry, I want to say John Starling, but I don't know because I don't follow English medium stuff too much. But I do know that Sheikh Furhan's list has a couple of different things in each of the madhahib, and it will probably have something there for you. Who are my favorite Hanabila mashayikh, and both traditional and contemporary? Well, Ahmed ibn Hanbal has to be the most favorite, right? And then, of course, my teachers. I think I'm highly indebted to my teachers who had the patience and kindness to allow me to study with them, to put up with my questions, to show me how to learn. Yeah, so I guess that's them. Abu Salihat says that John Starling has not, unfortunately. So okay, well, that's that. Okay, someone says on Instagram, I studied 3 different madhahib, Shafi'i, wal Hanbali, wal Hanafi. Could I choose one of them, or can I apply all in my daily life? I think you will find that the commonalities between all madhahib are actually greater than the differences between them. Okay, so there's a misnomer that everything in Islam is khilaf, and that somehow the scholars differ over everything, when in fact the things that they agree upon and the general principles of Islam are much more numerous. So when we study a book of fiqh and we see an issue of disagreement, that's probably like, a 1 to 7 or 1 to 10 ratio of the actual issues that scholars all agree upon and that are substantiated from the generalities of Islam. So, I would say follow where your yaqeen takes you, where your certainty takes you, and that is what is required of you in worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Abu Salihat, to answer this question about Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat, says Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan has an active class on Al-Akhsar. Right now he's currently covering transactions, and he said that Medina College currently has a class on it as well. I think class on it is what he meant. Right. All right. Jazakallahu khairan. All right, everybody. It is 10:08. I think it is time to hang it up for the night. And when we get back tomorrow, we're going to be covering Key Figures in Books number 3 from Al-Buhuti to Ibn Ibrahim. Let me grab this question from Sayyid Hamza. Assalamu alaikum. This is slightly unrelated, but does your book on Al-Ha'iyya have explanations or annotations to the Metin itself? Yes. So my book is, and actually I have a copy of it right here. Okay. So this is the Ha'iyya of Ibn Abi Dawud. And in every chapter, okay, you will see that there is that's the Al-Ajurri's attestation of the text. There's a title for the issue. There's the Arabic Ha'iyya text. There's a versified English translation. And then there is an explanation of that in prose. So it's not just the poem. It is a small explanation. And I put it as well, a short biography of Ibn Abi Dawud and my isnad back to Ibn Abi Dawud for the book. And of course, shout out to Abu Salihat for the amazing book cover work that he does. Jazakallah khairan. And I am highly indebted to him for that. All right. And inshallah, I think, there were some brothers online that were talking about we should do like an online reading of this. What do you guys think? If you would like to do that, put it in the comments, and I'll be happy to carve out a night, and we can read through it line by line, insha'Allah ta'ala. All right, everybody. I think that's it. I'm gonna go and finish my cup of golden turmeric milk, and then get ready for bed. All right, Jazakallah khair. Like I said, next tomorrow we'll be covering from Al-Buhuti down to Ibn Ibrahim, and insha'Allah ta'ala, I hope to see all of you then. And Allah bless you as well. Abu Salihat. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.